This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Mag Gupta.
Chapter 28. Pharas. Gilorn and Eorlim had had little success in their mission. They had decided that walking amongst the men of Gladium was too risky, and took to stealing through the shadows, while the pirates went about their duties. Eorlim was surprised by the fact that they had duties at all, and was even more shocked that many of them had more duties than the men of the kingdom. These were sailors, and were about their ships at all hours of the day, cleaning the decks, working the dirt out of the black sails, and maintaining the metal works on the riggings. It allowed for great mobility around the camp, but the soldiers didn't seem to care for instructions or planning, flitting from whichever role they saw fit to. The Rangers decided to move up to the commander's tents. Here they found something better, but the areas were more heavily guarded. Gilorn was right. This was an invasion army, and the invasion was imminent, but they couldn't find any details as to where they would land. The men of Gladium were not for writing or documenting, but the maps were marked with various points. When the day was getting on, Eorlim had the idea to follow the men around and eavesdrop on their talks. The pirates spoke their own tongue, but some of them spoke the common tongue of the kingdom. Unfortunately, the pirates seemed to shun those who spoke outside their mother tongue, and few men gave up anything useful. They managed to gain 1 point. They were going to attack Pharas in particular, and they were simply waiting for some sort of religious matter to pass. It was the purpose of them being there, and significant prizes awaited them for this favor. It was also clear they weren't going to be content with being in Ignatius's pocket, and were planning to turn on him. Gilorn suggested that they simply ask these men, pretending to be of the people again. But Eorlim had more sense than that. The men of Gladium were speaking the common tongue, in their own accents and dialects, something very different from the Italian or Dacian varieties. Their O's were A's in some places and I's in others, so this plan was shaken off. With a sigh of discontent, they went back to the mountainside. The pirates were finishing their duties now and were returning to their tents, something that made their escape something more difficult. The night came around by the time they were climbing down to avoid the watchtowers, and they waited by the beach. The preparations might have been rushed, but they were well done. There was no moon out, and the sea was in complete darkness. They waded out into the shallows and sat in the water, their skin wrinkling like old fruit. "I can't see anything," Eorlim shivered aloud. "Quiet," Gilorn whispered. "The water carries voices far more treacherously than land." It was the one piece of advice that Gilorn remembered from the captain. Eorlim sighed, shaking his head. He grumbled to himself as he flexed his weighted legs under the water. They waited and waited. Eorlim was shivering, more and more. Suddenly, the water began to brush against them, where it had been calm. "What?" Eorlim couldn't help but say. A dark object appeared before them, and the water was disturbed. "What big fish I come upon," a voice whispered in a quiet, toneless voice. "Good to see you, my friend," Gilorn said, not actually knowing whether or not he knew the man. The rowboat took them back to the ship, which was in anchor in the darkness. Gilorn didn't see it until it was on top of them, and the rowboat buffeted against it. Gilorn and Eorlim clambered aboard, their soaked clothes leaking over the deck of the ship. "Did you find anything?" the captain asked, without so much as a greeting. "Plenty," Gilorn said. "We need to get back to Pharas with all haste. The pirates have an army waiting for us, and a fleet bigger than anything we have." The captain didn't ask any questions and simply waved his orders to his crew. They made all haste. Every man was called forth to row and row hard. The ship met the shore within the hour, and they had horses waiting for them. Within another hour they rode into the courtyard of Pharas. They had to stable their own horses. No one was around. Still wet, they went into the hall, but the only person who was there was Half-Head, who was hardly pleased to see them. Yorlim had been something of a great nuisance to Half-Head, and he was easily remembered. "Captain," Gilorn greeted and saluting. Half-Head returned the courtesy. "Is our Lord Julius here?" "He's abed," Half-Head grunted. "Great," Gilorn groaned. He admired Julius, but he wasn't feeling brave enough to rob a noble of his sleep. Fortunately, Yorlim had no such restrictions. He summoned over one of the servants and demanded that he wake Julius. Half-Head ignored their presence after that. The servant took his time in coming back, and Julius took even longer in arriving. He had clearly had little sleep recently and was irritable, but this vanished when he saw the Rangers. "You've returned," he grunted. "What have you learned?" "We cannot attack Sicilia," Gilorn said, immediately. "They're planning to invade the coastline with a full army." Julius nodded wearily, but his lack of immediate reaction did not disguise that he understood perfectly. "I'll summon the generals," he yawned. He waved vaguely at the table. "Sit." The two rangers hadn't eaten since they were last in the castle, so they were fed with bread and milk. The swan came in with Tathar. Like always, the swan was just as alive as every other day, with no sign of tiredness. Tathar was a different story. He looked like a rat drowned in wine. He'd clearly been interrupted with by a woman, as the smell of wine and sex still covered him. He was barely able to stand, and his breeches were sodden with sexual fluids. He fell into his seat and let out a loud fart. The swan stood back and Half-Head stood up. Suddenly, a bucket full of ice-cold water was thrown over Tathar. He spluttered, cursed, and fell off of his seat. "Curse you, you son of a jackal," Tathar bellowed. "Don't come to war council stinking of wine then." Julius shook his head in annoyance. He turned to Gilorn as the others sat. "Speak of what you have seen, quickly." "The pirates have prepared an invasion army that dwarfs our own. Over 40 ships, and they are headed directly for us." 40? The swan gasped. "How many men?" "Over 10,000, Gilorn said. "More were coming even as we watched." "When are they attacking?" Julius was suddenly awake now. "Within the week," Gilorn said. "All that keeps them at bay is a religious moment of theirs. These are not simple pirates made to raid an unarmed caravan. These are soldiers. Their steel is great, and their ships are heavy and fast." "You saw them up close?" the swan asked. "Yes," Yorlim said, showing off his wounds. "We were almost discovered and tasted the steel ourselves. But we saw no armor with their men, just cloth and rawhide. Many men fought with naked chests and black ink. If we had archers, we could slay them easily in ambush." "We only have 200 archers," the swan said. "If it comes to battle, we are not defensible. We cannot hold out in this castle. We don't have room to move, and the terrain will not help our knights defend the gate." Julius nodded. "We must take our positions in the open fields. That is our only hope for victory." "Fuck victory," Tathar grunted. "Send word to the capital and the ward. We need reinforcements." "What reinforcements?" the swan demanded. "Your legions are still amassing. What is left of the Islesfield 1st Legion is guarding the northern passage to Dacia. The prince has no legions ready, and they will take longer than yours. We have already sent word to the Goths, and the Scots are in the middle of a succession crisis. This is not their fight. No, we are on our own here. Julius let out a long sigh. Shit, he rubbed his head. All right, gather our forces in the morning. I will lead the army. My friend, he said to the swan, you will lead the flanking force. Tathar, you will command the infantry cohorts of Islesfield. Tathar grunted his displeasure, but he made no complaint. Half-head. The captain looked up from his empty plate. I'm putting you in charge of the evacuation. Send the citizens to Seaward. Any who wish to remain are to remain to fight. Afterwards, you will captain the cohorts with Tathar. Half-head nodded and made no sound. Our only hope, Julius said, walking over to the map of the kingdom, is to find a battlefield that can prevent the enemy from outflanking us with sheer numbers. We need to find somewhere to bottle them up. Our country is hardly like that, Tathar belched. Our fields are open and wide, with no places for narrow corridors and traps. We could follow the same tactic that I took at the river crossing, the swan suggested. The battle he was referring to was his first command, in which he had taken a token force of soldiers to reinforce siege works on a city held by the Golden King. The Southerners had blocked the crossing by foot, and a storm had prevented him from taking a ship across the river, so he attacked the Sand People blockade using the terrifying effect of the storm and seaward shock tactics. He spread his lines dangerously thin, but long enough so that he could outflank his enemy, which outnumbered him nearly 5-1. The victory was the start of the Swan's legend, and was where he gained his name of the Swan. We could, Julius nodded, but we only have 1,500 men. Even if we had a single line loosely spaced, we would still be outflanked. Our advantage is in our formations and the charge of our horses on their flanks. Tathar stood and met Julius at the map. We need to focus on achieving local superiority in one area of the battlefield at a time. We should simply lock our troops in a crescent formation shield wall and use our cavalry to engage on our flanks. We'll destroy their right flank and then fold on their center and eventually their left. This plan had merit, but it ran on the assumption that the pirates wouldn't be able to overrun the army before any major damage had been done by the knights. Julius sighed in frustration. We need General Felthor, the swan muttered. He would know a strategy that can win us this battle. My uncle is in the citadel. Julius shook his head. By the time the nobles allow his commission, we'll be long dead. Felthor again, Tathar grumbled. Will I never be rid of that upstart? If you run for your betters when things start to get hard, what use would the kingdom have for us? He's right, Julius nodded, clutching his head. We'll send word to the cities, though. They need to know the situation. Send riders with word. I'll see to it at once, Halfhead saluted, and I'll prepare the garrison for the evacuation. Put a watch on the river, Julius nodded. I'll sleep on this, pray for advice from a higher knowledge than mine. We'll come back in the morning, hopefully with a plan. Despite what he said, however, Julius didn't sleep. The thought of the threat they faced was impossible. He needed an army, and the worst part of the situation was that one was on its way, but wouldn't get here in time. The sun was rising and filling his room with pale sunlight. He threw his blanket away in frustration and donned his cloak. He took his horse, disguised himself in a green hood, and rode out of the fort in silence. He rode at a gentle pace, feeling the chill sea wind blow through the gaps in his hood. He reached the shore, specifically a part that he'd returned to since he was a very young child. The section of beach was pure white sand. It was the only part of the seaward coast that had white sand, and it had remained a constant mystery as to why. Julius suspected, but he would never say. He dismounted and left his horse to wander. He knew he wouldn't wander far as he was well trained. Julius unclasped his cloak, leaving it to fall to the ground, and walked down the beach. His boots dragged on the white sand and left deep, heavy footprints. He continued walking until he came to a point in the land where it snaked around to allow for a hill. The cliff was as white as the sand, and he sat down with a flop of leather and metal. He waited, as he had many times before, looking out to the sea. The sun shone and the water rippled, both ignorant and uncaring of his presence. Finally, a wave smoothed out on the sand, and a bare foot stepped out of the water, followed by the rest of a beautiful woman of pure radiant starlight. Julius smiled at her, but did not move until she waved a hand at him to approach. She was naked, as she always was when she first appeared to him, but, as he approached, a white dress flowed over her body like water and settled on her, lighter than air. Her apparel was little better than her nakedness, as her legs protruded through slits in her dress that revealed all her flesh. Her breasts were covered with fabric only just wide enough to cover her nipples. She was stooping in the water as Julius approached, as if she'd always been doing it, and Julius was intruding. "I'm making your nephew a white glass necklace," she said to him, brushing her brilliantly blonde hair behind one of her pointed elven ears, "like the ones I used to make you when you were a baby." "My nephew," Julius said. He answered the question in his own head. Callisto was obviously pregnant. She seemed to understand what he was thinking and went back to her work. He watched her for a moment. "You know why I have come? You seek advice against the pirate threat that looms over you." The woman smiled at him and scooped up a clump of the white sand in a seashell. "Your strength at arms falters, and you stand little chance against the oncoming storm. You want to know how you can win." "Yes," Julius nodded. He took a seashell himself and began to scoop up sand with it. "Is there a way?" "There is always a way," the woman said. "That is the way of the world." "How?" Julius pressed. "I am no tactician." The woman looked out to the sea for a long time. For a moment, Julius wondered if she had forgotten he was there, but then she spoke. "In the sea, there are no castles or great armies to defend the weak. The weak defend themselves." She waved her hands in a parting motion, as if she was spreading curtains. The opaqueness of the water vanished in a large square, and Julius found he could see into the water. A large fish was attacking a school of smaller fish, but as it drew close, the small fish reformed themselves, much like soldiers on the battlefield, into a flat and thin formation, and caused the bigger fish to miss them and crash into the sea bottom. Julius watched with a curious intrigue as he watched the fish thrash around to disentangle itself from the ground and sent dirt in every direction. By the time the fish was ready to attack again, the formation had changed. The fish dived at them again, and the formation exploded outward. It was now in two formations, and the fish sped through the gap and crashed into the floor again. "Deception fits the dwellers in the deep well," Julius observed. "Is this my solution?" "It may be," the woman nodded. She was busy with her seashells again. "Men fear most what they cannot see. If you blind a man for even a moment in a fight, he dies. Blind an army and victory becomes simpler." Julius nodded. "We could spring a trap," he said. "Smoke and flames. We could break apart their army into groups and achieve victory over them individually." "It will not be an easy thing you speak of," the woman said. "Big fish are still dangerous, regardless of what tactics you use against them." Julius was taken with lust for glory now. "If we win, the renown will be greater than anything my house has seen." The woman smiled sadly. So young, she cupped his clean chin in her hand, as if she was about to kiss him. Just like my great love. You are so like him. The way you look, the way you fight, the way you love. Do not covet war and glory too much, my child. Neither will keep you warm at night, nor heal your wounds. Julius bowed his head, ashamed by his pride. Yes, my lady, you are right. Do you remember when we first met? She asked. Julius knew better than to lie. No, he said, smiling though. He knew the tale she had told him many times. She smiled as well. I stood over your cot. You were so small, your tiny hands reaching out to me. She pushed the straps of her dress down to reveal her breasts. For a moment she stood there facing Julius, her eyes distant and lost in thought. This woman was like a mother to him, so he felt no arousal. She covered her breasts in the sand, like she was bathing, and then out of the white mud, she pulled out a necklace of white uncut glass. I gave you one of these. She handed it to him. If you survive the storm, give this to your nephew and let him know the value of goodness. Julius toyed with it in his fingers. I will, he promised, keeping his eyes on her hands as she donned her dress again. She smiled at him reassuredly, cupping his chin in her hand again. Courage, my child, she whispered to him. You are a prince of Seaward. You have a greater purpose to fulfill in this war. I do not feel like a prince, Julius confessed. I feel like a child again, helpless. I don't know if I can do what the ancestors ask of me. You have such strength about you, Julius, she said. You will win this battle. How can you be sure? Because you must. Julius chuckled and then sighed in resignation. Every time I have called you, you have come. Whenever I have needed you, you have come. You would not do so if my cause was hopeless. The woman smiled. Reflect on that. She took him by his leather gauntleted arm. Good luck, my prince, until we meet again. My lady Hypatia, Julius bowed. Aphrodite. He closed his eyes as he bowed, and when he opened them again, he was alone. The waves gently lapped the sand around him, his footprints filling with water. The only evidence he had spoken to anyone, clutched gently in his hand.